Good afternoon. It's Sunday, the 24th of May. I'm Erin Viner, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. In our top story, the two teenage victims of the Jerusalem terror attack are in stable condition at the Hadassah Hospital in the capital after being stabbed in the back in the Old City late last night. The two were attacked on Beit Chabad Street near the Damascus Gate while heading toward the Western Wall to celebrate the Shavuot holiday. After examining security footage in the area, investigators tracked the movements of the suspect and arrested a 19-year-old Palestinian in his home, where they also discovered the knife they believe he used to stab the victims. There's been an upswing in so-called lone wolf terror attacks over the past several weeks, including on this last Wednesday when 3 border police officers were wounded after a Palestinian driver rammed his car into a crowd of people near the East Jerusalem neighborhood of Atur. The manager of the Population, Immigration and Border Authority in Tel Aviv committed suicide overnight in a tragic end to what appears to be a horrible misunderstanding. Over the past week, 47-year-old Ariel Ronas was repeatedly accused of being racist in the wake of accusations posted by a black Israeli woman on Facebook claiming to have been discriminated against while trying to obtain a passport for one of her children. In statements intended to shame civil servants at the authority, the woman wrote that she was instructed to wait in a lengthy line for an extended amount of time, while other mothers were able to queue in a special line designated for parents with small children. She says that when she complained to Ronas that the action was racist, he ordered her to get out of his sight. The comments rapidly unleashed widespread negative reaction. Shortly before taking his life, Ronas, who previously served as a high-ranking official in the Shin Bet security service, responded on his own Facebook page that he had been severely wronged and was devastated by the mass accusation of racism because he said he dedicated his entire life to fighting for equality. He appealed to the public to deeply consider the effect of their actions and words on social media before he fatally shot himself in the head. The complainant today wrote that she was overwhelmed by his death and that after years of suffering discrimination, this was the first time that she stated her grievances publicly. The bodies of a couple in their 80s and their 50-year-old son were discovered in the family's apartment in Arad. According to an initial investigation, the father is believed to have first murdered his fatally ill son, then killed his wife before taking his own life. A note was found in the apartment in which the father explained his actions, saying that he acted out of compassion to relieve his son of his misery. Police went to the apartment after being alerted by a relative that he was unable to reach anyone in the home by telephone. In further developments in the ongoing police investigation codenamed 512, a senior underworld figure wanted by police was today arrested at the Ben Gurion airport just as he was about to embark on a vacation with his family. The suspect was taken into police custody for alleged involvement in the highly publicized murder several years ago of another head of a crime family. He will be brought to court for an extension of his remand later tonight. Detectives say that they hope that this latest arrest will help them to solve another major chapter of the complex investigation against organized crime. So far, more than 60 people have been arrested in connection with the case. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu thanked Washington for blocking a global United Nations document aimed at ridding the world of nuclear weapons during a telephone conversation with U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry. The proposal was rejected on Friday and called for UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to convene a Middle East conference no later than March 2016, regardless of whether Israel and its neighbors agreed to an agenda. Israel is not a party to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and has never declared what is widely considered to be an extensive nuclear weapons program, which such a forum could force the country to acknowledge. In political news, the Prime Minister will continue his efforts to consolidate his government tomorrow, including the assignment of various tasks to members of Knesset belonging to his Likud party, such as the remaining available ministries, as well as chairmanships of certain Knesset committees. Netanyahu is also slated to meet with the opposition's Yesh Atid leader Yair Lapid tomorrow, after having already held meetings with Zionist Union leader Isaac Herzog and the head of the joint Arab list Ayman Odeh this past week. This will be the first time that the two men will hold talks since Netanyahu fired Lapid from his post as finance minister on December 1st that hastened the end of the last government. Longtime director of the U.S. Anti-Defamation League, Abe Foxman, will soon be stepping down from his post after 27 years, bringing an end to 5 decades of Jewish communal service. Ahead of his expected retirement in July, Foxman spoke to Israel Television's Yaakov Elon, who asked him about the significance of what he called the unprecedented lack of automatic support from the American Jewish community for the victory of an Israeli prime minister at the polls.
Well, maybe a little older than you are. It's not the first time. I'm old enough to remember 1977 when the Israeli people elected Menachem Begin. It was a shock. It was a shock to the body politic of the American Jewish community, who didn't know him, and what they knew came from 30 years of labor government propaganda. So compared to the attitudes, the anxieties, this is a prime minister they know. This is the 4th time that he is prime minister.
But you had, this time you had an organization like J Street who actively campaigned against Netanyahu.
Again, we are, American Jewish community is a pluralistic community. It has all kinds of political views. In fact, till '77, there was only one political view, which was pro-labor, etc. I don't think it was a trauma. Look, a lot of people who didn't want him to be reelected, but I guess poor people wanted him to be reelected. And as long as the American Jewish community respects Israel as a democracy, sometimes democracy isn't necessarily exactly the results that you want. But I think they will accommodate. I think they will continue to live with him, even those who don't like him.
When the Obama administration criticized Netanyahu for what was perceived as racial comments during the campaign, was they right to do that?
I think it was unfair. I think it was absolutely unfair. I think Democrats are guilty, Republicans are guilty. You got to go. They're going after me. They're organizing. They're coming in buses. Whoever that they are is the opposition. I think it was unfair. I think it was part of the president's effort to undermine the prime minister, because the United States and Israel today are in a very serious disagreement on a very serious policy issue.
What's broken with U.S.-Israeli relationships?
I don't think anything is broken. I think on many levels the relationship continues and continues on a very intimate basis. If you talk about military, if you talk about intelligence, if you're talking about trade. It's not a question, there's a difference. There's a national security assessment difference. And it's for the first time, I believe, in my recollection, that our two countries see the Middle East, or future in the Middle East, and significant interests different. President of the United States truly believes that it's in America's best interest to do whatever he can to prevent another war in the Middle East for the United States. That's his #1 objective to leave in terms of his legacy. He's not doing it to hurt Israel. He believes that this may help Israel. In this country, this is seen as a very, very dangerous policy position. By the way, ironic, the two special friends of the United States in the region, Saudi Arabia and Israel, see this policy difference in the same light. That means here you have Saudi Arabia and the United States, close allies, very close allies, today are at odds. And as we sit, there are meetings in Washington trying to straighten it out. The rhetoric is different, but the differences are the same. So it's not broken. It is a serious difference in policy about this region.
And the result of this, with Netanyahu's re-election and Obama's remaining tenure at the White House, are we on a collision course now?
No, because again, at the end of the day, there are a lot of more positive interests than one significant interest. I think the United States will need Israel as a strong ally, and Israel is dependent on the United States as its strongest only ally in the future. So they'll find a way to work with it.
A new government always provides a good opportunity to rethink issues, says McGill University professor Gil Troy, who told IBA's Ellie Wogelenter that one that he believes requires serious reconsideration is the matter of the settlements.
The big headline this week is Netanyahu is bringing shalom to the Middle East. He's bringing, if not peace, at least Sylvan shalom to the Middle East and to the Middle East peace process. And while we can joke about that, the truth is that every opportunity to me with a new government is an opportunity to try to rethink this issue. And one way I've been trying to think about it is that we fall into this box where we say, settlements are illegal, bad, foolish, unwise, and we should therefore give them up. Or we say settlements are legal, holy, perfect. And I want to make an argument that settlements are completely legitimate, completely legal, because if you go back to Jewish history, if you go back to the British mandate of the 1920s, if you go back to the San Remo Declaration, if you go back to the UN 1947 Partition Plan, all those pieces of paper, all those legitimate legal documents gave Jews rights to settlement anywhere between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River. And no document has invalidated that. Moreover, the 19 years that Jordanians controlled the West Bank from 1949 to 1967, they had illegitimate control. There was no formal legal doctrine giving them that. And there's also no organic history to the West Bank. So all that means that Jewish settlement in all these areas is legitimate. It's legal. That doesn't mean it's wise. And in fact, I would argue that the true person devoted to peace should say, we are absolutely committed to our rights in Hebron. We're absolutely committed to our legitimacy settling anywhere. But we love peace so much, we're willing to give it up. We love peace so much, we're willing to sacrifice exercising those rights without renouncing those rights. By contrast, all too often the peace camp, the so-called peace camp, comes from a perspective saying, well, we're brigands, we don't belong there, we stole Palestinian land, we violated the organic integrity of the West Bank, which never had any, and then I'm throwing you scraps, and we're skulking away. I don't want to throw scraps. I want to say, and it's both a negotiation tactic, but also I think it would change the dynamic in the conversation here, to say, if we could all agree on the legitimacy, if we could all agree on the legality, and if we could all point out that calling the settlements illegal is an attempt to make Israel an outlaw state and is very, very dangerous, and say, okay, now that we accept that, we've put that aside, let's talk about the advisability. Let's talk about how wise it is to have a settlement of 1,500 in a city of 200,000 Palestinians. Let's talk about the advisability of controlling hilltops. Let's talk about the morality of it. But it's a different conversation, and I think that might lower the rhetorical temperature.
But you'll agree that there are some places, some areas, some cities that even in a peace deal, Israel is not giving up.
First of all, ideologically, we should never give up Hebron. Ideologically, we should never give up Jerusalem. Ideologically, we should never give up our deep commitment. I mean, biblically, right? If we talk about nationalisms, all forms of nationalisms are rooted in a story and in a history. And the history of the Jewish people is much more located in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria than it is in Tel Aviv. But I don't just live in history, I live in the 21st century. And in the 21st century, I tend to look at demography as my key line. So I want to say ideologically, we should never give up our rights to those places. And people like Shimon Peres and Yitzhak Rabin, when they, by the way, were the ones who helped establish the settlement movement in the 1970s and the 1980s, and we shouldn't forget that, looked at it in the same way. Nevertheless, we live in the real world and we live in the 21st century. In the 21st century, most Israelis have already gotten over that hump and accepted the fact that we're going to have some compromise. Because just as the Palestinians would love it if didn't exist, most Israelis would love it if there was a peaceful way for the Palestinians to leave, but it's not happening. So we have two people in love with the same land. And then the challenge becomes, how do we go ahead and work out some kind of compromise? And most Israelis have accepted the fact that if there's going to be some kind of Palestinian entity, there's going to have to be some movement. And to me, it should be based more on demography than on the history.
Gained ground in the west of the country today as part of their advance toward Ramadi, just 1 week after it was captured by the insurgents. According to local authorities, troops have retaken control of a town just 10 kilometers east of Ramadi with the help of Shiite paramilitary units and pro-government Sunni tribal fighters. The counteroffensive was launched yesterday against the insurgents, who are now pushing east toward a key military base after their recent success in the capital of the Anbar province. Meanwhile, in Syria, ISIS radicals are boasting that they have been able to break into the museum in Palmyra that houses stunning archaeological relics. Officials say that ahead of the extremists' advance, they were able to remove many of the ancient works for safekeeping. ISIS troops circulated a photograph on Twitter of their black flag flying on top of the town's hilltop castle, which many are hoping may be spared the kind of destruction that ISIS is known to wreak because it originated during the Islamic civilization hundreds of years ago. The extremist Sunnis demolished the pre-Islamic heritage sites in Iraq's Hatra and Nineveh sites, although many of Palmyra's antiquities have existed prior to that era. Commanders in a U.S.-led coalition say that airstrikes against Islamic State installations near the city have destroyed 6 of the group's anti-aircraft artillery systems. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees is asking the international community to undertake far greater efforts to support the millions of people who have been displaced by the conflicts in Iraq and Syria. Antonio Guterres made the call during his address to the World Economic Forum on the Middle East and North Africa, held on the Jordanian side of the Dead Sea.
Face the need to have, first of all, a much stronger humanitarian support to the people displaced from Syria and from Iraq. We have now more than 4 million registered refugees from Syria and the neighboring countries, but we have almost 15 million people displaced in the Syria and Iraq context, and it is absolutely essential to address their basic humanitarian needs. We cannot put only pressure on Lebanon and Jordan. We need to ask the international community to assume its responsibilities and to express its solidarity with these countries that are in the first line of impact of this dramatic situation.
Security efforts in Saudi Arabia have confirmed that Friday's deadly suicide bombing at a Shiite mosque in the country's eastern Qatif region was carried out by an Islamic State supporter, confirming earlier claims of responsibility from the terror group. Riyadh's Ministry of the Interior has identified the bomber as Saudi citizen Saleh bin Abdul Rahman al-Kasham, who was wanted for being an active member of an Islamic State-linked terror cell. The explosive used in the bombing has been determined to have been a military-grade compound known as RDX. The attack on the house of worship in the village of Al-Qudeh was the deadliest assault in the kingdom since a 2004 al-Qaeda attack on compounds housing foreign workers. Meanwhile, regional security chiefs convened for a summit at Arab League headquarters in Cairo yesterday to discuss strategies to combat area threats, including a proposal to form a united defense force. Egyptian Army Chief of Staff Mahmoud Higazi headed that meeting, where he said that it is critical that details of the United Military Force proposal raised in Sharm el-Sheikh earlier this year be agreed to quickly so that it can be implemented as soon as possible. Staying in Egypt, and imprisoned former President Mohamed Morsi is back in court. The Islamist leader's 5th trial just opened on charges that he and several other secular figures were behind the 2011 uprising, as the government of current President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi persists with its sweeping campaign to crack down on all forms of opposition that is being described by the United Nations as unprecedented in recent history, with thousands being jailed and many others sentenced to death after speedy trials. Morsi was also given the death penalty on May 16th for his role in the Wadi al-Natrun prison break during the revolution that toppled his predecessor Hosni Mubarak from power, although the court will pronounce its final decision on June 2nd. Islamists are warning of a severe backlash if Morsi is executed. Here at home, tens of thousands of people took to the great outdoors during this extended Shavuot holiday weekend, visiting the country's national parks, nature reserves, and forests. Many others spent the night camping out next to the Sea of Galilee in the north. And as is customary, the nation's kibbutzim and moshavim opened their gates and hosted guests for traditional holiday celebrations, including dancing and spring feasts featuring delicious dairy products, fruit, and vegetables. And there's a joke that the holiday is called Shavuot, which means weeks in Hebrew, because that's just about how long it takes to burn off all those calories that were consumed during the holiday. Now turning to the weather, and Get set to keep cool. The IBA weather team says that we're heading into a very steamy week. Here's the forecast at home and abroad over the next 24 hours. Join us again tomorrow when I'll be back to bring you the latest breaking news from Israel. I'm Erin Viner, wishing you a wonderful evening, a joyous Shavuot holiday, and shalom from Jerusalem.